On this week's episode, we're going to discuss the new Linux kernel and how it's a peek into our PC futures. Welcome to Destination Linux, where we discuss the latest news, hot topics, gaming, mobile, and all things open source and Linux. My name is Michael.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Jill.
We're also going to be covering how Microsoft hearts iPhones now.
What?
Plus, we've got some Linux gaming and our software spotlight and so much more. Now let's get our show on the road toward Destination Linux.
Our feedback this week comes from Eric. Eric has this to say. So if Wendy's evil alter ego is Sinister Wendy, can we dub Jill's Jaleficent?
Close.
Yes, that one. Thank you.
Close enough.
Jaleficent. I don't know. Can we?
So
first of all, I don't know that that's Wendy's alter ego. I think that's just her ego.
So for those who are wondering, Wendy is in the room right now listening to Ryan. So he's going to suffer for this.
Yeah. I like the idea, but it's too hard to pronounce. We got to come up with something a little easier to pronounce.
I mean, Jaleficent is not bad.
I find it difficult to say.
Eric, this is actually really funny. So it turns out that one of my favorite Disney villains is Maleficent. But it is because the cast member at Disneyland that plays the character is actually brilliant and, interacts with the Disney attendees with flair and evil vigor. And I honestly try to avoid her when she is walking around Sleeping Beauty's castle in Fantasyland because, well, she scares me.
Jill scares easy. If you didn't notice in the gaming section.
If she has evil vigor, I think that, it's understandable to have that.
Does Wendy scare you, Jill? Out of curiosity, does Wendy scare you?
Does Wendy have evil vigor?
She scares me. So.
I think Wendy does have some evil vigor, but she doesn't scare me. Oh, I love you, Wendy.
So Eric goes on to say, new fan here on DL. I found you guys from Jupiter Broadcasting's prediction show where Michael played the judge. Look at that, nice. Michael. You must have done a good job as a Judge Judy over there.
Or at least I was entertaining enough to be bad at that job to, either way.
Either way, it worked. They say they're loving the content so far. Looking forward to enjoying more of your entertaining chemistry. Well, thank you, Eric. That was an awesome email to receive. And the Jaleficent, oh man, I can't do it. That Jill thing, that Jill thing could be a t-shirt. I won't ever be able to pronounce it, but it could be a t-shirt.
It could be a t-shirt. And also I get like a photo of Jill and we just kind of like add some like the Maleficent character stuff to it.
Yeah.
But what's funny is that I sent this to you when I saw this because I knew you wouldn't be able to say it. But also the reason is because when I first read it, it took me a couple times to get like, yeah.
Today. Yeah.
It was kind of difficult for me too.
Aww.
No, thank you so much, Eric. And by the way, for those fans of Jill out there, there's a new Unhackable t-shirt that you need to go pick up, which of course is dedicated to Jill there. So go check that out. It's in the store now. It's amazing what Michael will do to avoid rat poison. And if you want to send in your own comments, go to destinationlinux.net/comments and send them to us, or you can post them on the forum at destinationlinux.net/forum. We love to hear from our audience, and we will maybe feature it on a future show. So this week, there's some really exciting news. I mean, it's going to when we go through this line by line, you're going to be blown away. Linux kernel 6.10.
Wait.
Michael, wake up, Michael.
Huh?
Okay.
What?
So maybe kernels aren't always the most exciting for everyone, but we're going to make it exciting to you because the Linux kernel is, it's why we're all here, right? It's what we're talking about.
That is why we're here.
Absolutely.
Linux kernel powers everything that we love so much in Linux. And so there's some really interesting things that have happened in 6.10. And the reason why we don't cover every Linux kernel release, but this one is a little special. And I wanted to take some time to get into it because as I was going through the Linux kernel notes, which, by the way, a little birdie told me that Jill reads the Linux kernel notes line by line. That's a
Linux
special
kernel mailing list. I read that every release.
That's amazing. You could be like Jill and read the entire Linux kernel line by line, or we'll just give you the highlights here, which I think to me, the big highlight is that we're seeing a lot of ARM and RISC-V enablement in this kernel. So why is this a big deal? Well, if you hadn't noticed, right, Apple kind of went all ARM. And then you've got Microsoft now with their Snapdragon X going ARM. And it leaves the question, like, is Linux going to be prepared for this new set of laptops out there to be able to run ARM? Our application's going to be able to run ARM. And the good news is we kind of already had a great foundation with some of this with Raspberry Pi, but we're getting more enablement now here than ever. And it was just really exciting for me to see that we're kind of ahead of the curve in so many ways of getting enablement for a lot of these things like new laptops and stuff right out of the box. And so that's why I wanted to bring attention to 6.10.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in there in terms of the hardware stuff. Like we have some new stuff for AMD and Intel and all that sort of stuff. So it's not even just ARM, but the fact that they're putting all that effort into ARM is good because we've always had some level of support for ARM, but most of the time ARM has always been like these IoT things or these system on a chip stuff that's not like super powerful. And now we have things like the Apple stuff going with this trying to make super powerful, or the Snapdragon Elite, which is trying to make the super powerful ARMs and all that sort of stuff. And unlike Ryan's noodle arms, it's trying to do it's trying to do some like, taking it much farther. And a lot of people are worried about like, is Linux going to keep up with those sorts of things because of the way that ARM, the architecture of ARM, where you have compatibility with different hardware based on the hardware itself, and you have to specify like the actual support for that particular hardware rather than having this global universal support like x86 had. So, and we're happy to see that we are getting that support.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned AMD, and we've talked about this in past shows, but for those who haven't listened to all the past shows, AMD has been a huge proponent of making sure their hardware is enabled in Linux, in the kernel. And this is very, very beneficial to us because you go and you get the latest AMD stuff. You want to be able to run it on Linux. As Linux is not just for the older stuff, it works great on that, but it's for the latest stuff too. And AMD makes that possible because they build things like, for instance, the new Zen 5 processors. There's already code in 6.10 that's ready for Zen 5. So when they release, we'll be able to run those processors, have those instruction sets there. There's now support for newer AMD GPUs on the RISC-V platform. So they're also adding in open source there as well. So AMD is really doing some great work making sure that Linux is getting the love there. And
it's also great because AMD historically would not have the support for some of their new stuff until later. And the fact that they've switched that over, so they're now getting like Zen 5 before the Zen 5 are out, that's fantastic news.
Yeah,
like you and Mark Shuttleworth, me and Lisa Sue are like this, man.
Yeah.
Once I started complaining, she fixed it all up for me.
So when I call him Space Bro, what do you call Lisa Sue?
Yeah. CPU gal. Yeah, that's what. Yeah.
Chip gal.
Chip gal. There you
go. Also, there's RISC support for the RISC-V architecture. We already have RISC support for RISC-V. This is awesome. And, the upcoming Intel Battlemage GPUs, there is now audio support via the HDMI interface, which is much needed, and it's coming.
I'm really excited about this future for Intel. Intel, I was going to get to, also does a lot for Linux, like a lot in the open source world. Probably before AMD did, for a very long time. And they do a lot of work in the kernel as well. So I'm very excited that Intel can hopefully turn the page. Right now, they're in the news for a lot of their processors dying, not working well. It's not been good years for Intel. And it's weird because they were at the top, like the tippity top. Nobody could touch them. And now they've really struggled. But their Battlemage GPUs, I think they're learning a lot of lessons there. I think they've got some really interesting architecture they're working on. They've still got some stuff to clean up, but I'm always going to be kind of a fan of getting Intel back on its feet because of all the stuff that they've done historically for Linux out there. But ARM is really starting to take everyone's attention, like it or not. And one of the things that I thought was interesting here in the ARM architecture is that it receives support for Clang, which is a set of tools that helps programmers write the instructions for the CPU. Michael, you were talking about the fact that, hey, just because you have one ARM processor support doesn't mean all the ARMs within that family will be supported, because everyone can kind of do their own little take on their own processor.
And they typically do.
So this can create issues and things, but having very strong support for Clang and stuff like this in there helps to make sure that they can obviously write the instructions correctly for each CPU. And then there's tons of security improvements. So we talked about AMD, Intel. Well, Google's in there as well. They've done a ton of security work this go round. Speaking of Clang, they implemented a solution based on Clang and GCC and introduces an attribute that makes it so basically disk file encryption's better, your memory sealing is better, and your encryption is more protected. So Google's in there, and I'm sure this benefits them as well, but I still appreciate it. Google's in there making sure that Linux is more secure. So I'll take it.
It's great that they're doing it. We know that it's benefiting them, but that's okay. It's if you're benefiting everybody else, because you're also benefiting, that there's no problem with that. I feel like that's kind of like the same thing that if you look at most companies, they're going to be doing stuff for themselves. But if they release it and it helps everybody, then that's fine. Who cares? But they're talking about something that's very important, because this is like a notorious keyword that people hear all the time, which is buffer overflows. And the whole point of this is to help prevent buffer overflows, which is a huge deal when it comes to security flaws and that sort of stuff. So like most of the time when you hear there's a new vulnerability found, it's usually a buffer overflow.
Yeah, that's true.
And another cool thing is there's hardware enablement for current laptops, including ARM ones, like the ARM-powered Acer Aspire 1 from 2021 now has full Linux support in the release of Linux kernel 6.10. And so that's really awesome. So it's not just ARM in the future, it's ARM today.
Yeah. I didn't even know Acer had an ARM laptop.
Yeah.
But now if I found one for a really good price, knowing it has Linux support, it makes it a much more attractive laptop to me. So,
and gosh, there's also some hardware enablement on webcams that use the Intel IPU and MIPI camera sensors. They now have better low light performance, improved image quality, and faster frame rates, thanks to the new official Intel IPU6 Linux driver. This was one of the big things in this Linux kernel release, because everybody's been wanting the official driver, and now we have it. So webcams on Tiger Lake and newer laptops with 6th gen Intel IPUs will look a lot better. That's going to be awesome.
Really good news.
Yeah.
Now, Michael, we'll probably cover this on a future episode some more, but there's also some news about NVIDIA kind of doing some more in open source here.
That's true.
You notice NVIDIA's missing out of this whole kernel release.
As they usually are when it comes to kernel releases, because they hardly ever actually support. They do make their own stuff for the kernel, but it's usually out of tree stuff, which in this case is still true. But it's interesting because what they're doing that is out of tree is they're pushing towards a lot of the open source stuff that they're doing, because they had a blog post recently that said that they're going to be transitioning fully to the open source kernel modules for the GPU stuff, which is a huge deal, and also not at all. Why? Because the user space drivers are still closed.
Yeah, that's the problem.
So it's good. It's obviously it's a step forward. It's something that is good. It's something we never expected NVIDIA to ever do. So at least there's that part to it. So maybe it's like a gradual stage. Maybe this is like the first step to the full open source stuff. Who knows? But
it's
also
like leading a puppy to its dog bowl. You gotta lead little bits of food.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on, NVIDIA. In their case, though, it's $1 trillion buckets. You gotta have $1 trillion buckets, and they come over there and gobble up. Come over here a little closer to open source.
Yeah.
Come on.
It's good that they're doing it at least a little bit, but hopefully someday they do it more. And now AMD does have their own proprietary driver options, but it's not the main focus. It's like if you need certain stuff that they have to be, then you can use it. But where NVIDIA is like, that's the default. So they are doing a lot of work with Nuvo, and that we talked about that in a previous episode where they're putting a lot of effort into Nuvo as well, because one of the developers from Nuvo started working with NVIDIA, and they started doing that as like a collaboration thing. So I am happy that NVIDIA is doing as much as they are doing, But I was when I saw the blog post, people were talking about it. It's like, oh wow, this is huge news. And I looked into it, like, well, I mean, it's not exactly what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
You see NVIDIA and open source in a headline, you get really excited.
Yeah.
I am, there's a lot of reasons why people want to use NVIDIA. DaVinci Resolve being one that we come across quite often. And then there's OBS as well, honestly. The NVENC capabilities in OBS is incredible with NVIDIA. So certain applications, while in general I recommend AMD because of the work they do with Linux, certain applications just run better on NVIDIA graphics cards. And obviously they kind of have a hold on the market like nobody else. And so it's great to see when NVIDIA does anything towards open source. But while they're like worth, I don't know, $50 trillion or whatever it is now, it's probably very hard to incentivize them. But thankfully, a lot of the stuff they're doing with AI and stuff does involve open source. So that's that $1 trillion bucket that we keep leading them towards over.
And also a lot of the companies that are providing like frameworks and stuff for AI are typically doing it in an open source way. So it is more likely to benefit them in a way to deal with that sort of stuff. So I'm optimistic, hopefully optimistic.
Come on, NVIDIA.
And slightly cautious.
Come on, boy. Come on. Get over here.
Don't you want it? Yes, you do want $1 trillion more.
That's why they're going to keep those CUDA drivers proprietary.
Yeah, probably. Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
But I mentioned OBS there, Michael, and there's some really cool OBS news as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool stuff because the latest version of OBS is out. We have OBS Studio 30.2. And for those who are not familiar, OBS is an open source project that allows you to stream video and also capture your screen and all sorts of stuff. But it's mostly known for being a broadcasting and streaming solution. And the fact that it's open source and free and has full Linux support is awesome. So they're a great example of being a standard of the industry because it's used so much like across all sorts of types of different companies. And it's an open source project, which proves that you can successfully create a project
and be at the
and
top.
It be open source and still be the top.
Tippity top, the best, the standard of the industry. I love using OBS as an example when people ask, can OBS set the standard and be the leader? And I'm like, yeah, can a open source software, be the leader? And it's like, yes, OBS absolutely is an example of that. And I don't know how we got so lucky that we get so much awesome OBS support in Linux. But when we were talking in the pre-show, you all mentioned some of the OBS employees are big Linux fans, and that probably helps. So I like that.
I'm pretty sure at least one of the main developers is a Linux user. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
I like to believe
you're right, Michael. In fact, I talked to him at TwitchCon back in 2017.
Of course you did.
Of course you did, Jill. Of course you did.
Wait, you've been to TwitchCon?
Yeah, twice.
Oh my gosh.
Of course she had, Brian.
Jill's just amazing, man. Unbelievable. I want
probably
to
has like the
life,
Twitch, she probably has like the Twitch, heads, like the executives are on speed dial, and like whenever you want to talk to them,
Well, back to OBS here. There's some really cool support. A lot of it NVIDIA based support, but there's a lot of great support added specifically for Linux. Sometimes I look through the OBS notes and I see all these features and they're not for Linux specifically. They're more enabled for Windows and stuff.
Like the first version sometimes is made for Windows only, and then they port it to Linux. So it is. So when we say it's fully supported on Linux, it's true, but it's like technically it's like a 99%. There might be like a feature or two that is not available for Linux, but this particular release is just filled with correcting some of that. Right. So we have the NVIDIA AV1 support for Linux, or for the NVENC encoder specifically to be native support, which is very good because it means that you're going to be able to use GPU acceleration much better for your streaming. Also added Linux shared texture support for the NVENC encoder, as well as shared texture support for other stuff, including QuickSync encoder, the VA API encoder, as well as added HEVC support for WebRTC output. So for those who are not familiar, HEVC, you'll probably, if you're an iPhone user, you've probably seen that format a lot because I'm pretty sure that's the standard default one they use. But I've not really seen it that much outside of like iPhone devices. So that's interesting that they add support for it, especially with the RTPC, the WebRTC. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff here, and especially all of the NVIDIA stuff, because I mean, NVIDIA's support for streaming has always been like something that people look for, and for like gaming and that sort of stuff, because of all the CUDA stuff and whatever. So it's really good to see that OBS is supporting it on Linux for that.
Yeah, there's just a ton of great stuff in here, and they've got a ton of bug fixes as well. So they've definitely put a lot of effort into making sure Linux is a first-class citizen here, and I appreciate that.
And also, I love the fact that they put so much effort into the Pipewire support, because Pipewire is exclusively Linux, right? So they're putting all that much effort into making sure that it's got quality support for Pipewire, because Pipewire is not just audio, people. For those who just think it's like a replacement for Pulse Audio, yes, it is that, but it's also a video streaming system too. So having support for it is very crucial, and the fact that OBS is doing that and it's a exclusive feature to Linux shows how much effort OBS puts towards Linux.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another really cool feature of OBS Studio 30.2 that is the support for hybrid MP4 output format was actually added, which allows you to recover the video if you have a power outage or a system failure. Previously, this could only be achieved if you use the matroska.mkv video format, which I know Michael knows very well.
Yeah.
So, but
everyone
now
should use that.
Yeah. So, but now you can use hybrid MP4. It's still in beta, but it does work, and it also supports chapter markers via a hotkey or an API, which you can use in professional video editors like DaVinci Resolve, and that's a game changer as well.
That is very good, and it's very important, because when people are using MP4 and the first time that you do something and then all of it is destroyed, because MP4 as a format is not good.
So many times.
Yeah. So as soon as that happened to me, I switched over to MKV, and I've always used MKV. But it's really good that this hybrid MP4 thing is having support. So I'm happy to see that OBS is supporting these kinds of formats that are added and improved upon. And I would also like to point out that MKV can do all that stuff already. So the markers, chapter markers, you can already do that. The not losing your data, you can already do that. So like, who cares?
Since day one.
Well,
but
here's why I care.
So many people are using MP4.
That's
so
because
especially new users.
They've been informed incorrectly. That's the problem.
I know.
MKV is still better. And also like the codec system of MP4 and the licensing issues with MP4.
So annoying.
And people are now promoting MP5, which is so worse.
It's
Do
even
not
worse.
use MP5.
Yeah.
It is like a licensing nightmare. So if in us, like right now, it might seem like it's okay, but as soon as they decide to like be horrible, because they actually removed the limit. There used to be like a certain amount where you could pay a fee and you could like have an unlimited use case. That is gone, and MP5 is even more expensive. So it's like there's a lot of nonsense to this. So I just want to use MKV.
Well, if you use MKV
everywhere,
and the software that you're using requires a different format, like MP4 or whatever, then what you can do is use Handbrake and convert it over. Handbrake, so this is your tip and trick, is a fantastic program that allows you to easily convert between file formats. So you can start in MKV. That way, if you have that power outage in the middle of recording an hour-long video, which I've done multiple times, you can recover it. And then if you have a software that wants to edit an MP4 another format, then you just use Handbrake and convert it right before you move it into the editor, and you are good to go.
Yeah,
that's a good tip. And also, if your editor requires it to be MP4, you find another editor.
Probably not bad advice as well there. All right, so mobile news. There's some really interesting thing here. Microsoft, has repeatedly failed to get into the phone market with their own dominant OS. Like they tried. I don't really think they tried hard enough, honestly, because they did just a lot of confusing marketing, like with that phone Brandon had, the Surface phone.
Yeah, it's not a phone.
Not a phone.
It's not a phone.
But it is a phone.
It's a platform.
I really think if they would have stuck with it, like Microsoft would be a player right now. And the reason is because Android and Apple are so god-awfully boring with their current updates that people would probably just be like, I want to try just something new that feels different on a phone right now. So I think that they just didn't have the perseverance here that they needed.
I also think the idea of having the dual screen is the smarter choice because Sony did it too, and it was a really cool idea, and they abandoned it too. I don't understand why the folding phone, like the dual screen, accomplishes the same thing, but it's also more reliable in the sense that you don't have to worry about the screen itself being able to do this fold and have this crease. And it's funny because I would rather there be a bezel than a crease. That crease annoys me so much.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. Like I can't it's like at certain angles you don't see it, and certain angles it's so harsh. I would rather it be always there than just occasionally there and just to kind of like annoy me or irritate me at like random times.
I've used all of the flip or the fold phones, from the flip Motorola Razr that flips up to the folds that fold out. And I got to tell you, the best one of the bunch, in my opinion, is the Moto Razr that flips. It's the most convenient. The one that folds is very nice because you get that big screen, but the weight and heft of those phones, and just the size of them overall is just, to me, the amount of times that I would use the Pixel Fold, for instance, in its full tablet form, I guess you would call it, was just 1% of the time. And the rest of the time, I'm just holding this thing that's just too thick and not a lot of purpose behind it. Whereas the Razr, folding down like it did, was super convenient for things like the gym or people carrying your phone in the front pocket because it made it so small, miniature, and it didn't slide out of your pocket and things like that.
That is like the most reasonable way of using the folding thing, because you basically have a smartphone that you can make smaller rather than a smartphone you can make much bigger.
Right. There's tablets for that.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Either way, Microsoft has tried, they gave up on their own browser engine and they went Edge. And they also adopted Android for their connectivity into their OS. So they wanted to have that kind of cohesiveness that Mac OS has with its iPhone. And so if you log in or install Windows, which if you have to, I'm sorry, but if you do, then you're going to see this thing that comes up that says, hey, you want to connect your Android phone so you can get your messages and things like that, just like you can with an iPhone and Mac OS. So they're trying to create that convergence there, which makes this article really funny that came out in the news. And the article is basically that Microsoft banned the use of Android phones for its staff in China. And so people were kind of making fun of them pretty hard this week, and perhaps rightfully so, over this.
All of your features that you've made for Android, you can't have.
I mean,
for your own employees.
So in place of Android, users will have to use an iPhone in order to get into their systems in China, which great for Apple, but
pretty weird experience for the Microsoft employees that are not allowed to use. They have to use the competitor device. Like technically, yes, Android is a competitor, but in a way, it isn't, because Microsoft has their own versions of an Android device.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember back in the day hearing rumors. I don't know if they were true, but like if you brought a Pepsi into Coke, if you worked for Coke and you brought a Pepsi into your Coke workplace, that you would get fired. Like it was like a no-no. And I would imagine like at Microsoft, if you're walking around with an iPhone and a MacBook, like, is that really like, they're like, all right,
It reminds me of like going to, it will remain unnamed, but there was a point where we went to, we've gone to many Linux conferences, right? And there was one many years ago where we went and the entire thing was ran by Microsoft Windows, and every presentation was presented on Windows. And the tech team would, if you had any issue, they would provide you with a Windows laptop. So that was an odd experience. And that reminded me like that kind of thing. You're talking about the Pepsi and the Coke thing.
Right.
That reminded me when I was like, this was like such a weird thing to be happening. Like we're at a Linux conference and they're making us use Windows stuff.
Yeah,
but
and I think that was like the hotel tech staff required it for their presentation stuff, but that got fixed, thankfully. But that was weird. I remember me and you both laughing about that. Like, okay,
exactly. And also, I had a presentation of a particular application that was only a Linux app, and they gave me a Windows laptop to use, and I'm like, what are you talking about?
Then they gave you a Chromebook. So there was that.
That was actually somebody in the crowd who gave me a Chromebook.
Yeah.
And it was, and they actually helped me until I realized the Chromebook doesn't have certain keys that I was going to demonstrate what they did. And like, whatever. But it was a fun time anyway, because I got to experience the chaos of a presentation that was just falling apart. But let's talk about how Microsoft's ability to use Android is falling apart for some of their employees.
Well, just for China. And so a lot of people are out there saying this is an example of why iOS is more secure. And I've talked about this ad nauseum. I've defended this position ad nauseum. And by the way, I was right. But iPhone is obviously a more secure device. Like, it's more privacy focused specifically. And that has to do more with the fact that Apple has maintained complete control. So is it because of the walled garden? Of course, it's because of the walled garden. But there's also other things that they do, like actually, implement a proper security and controls over your privacy and things to let you know what apps are actually doing on your device and stuff like that. Those type of things make Apple just a better ecosystem when it comes to that. With that being said, Android has a lot more flexibility, and that flexibility comes with a price, especially in China, where you don't have your official Google Play Store. And the manufacturers there, like Huawei and Xiaomi, they have their own versions of stores. And that's why Microsoft specifically can't have their employees utilizing that, because they can put whatever apps that they want in these stores that are maintained by these manufacturers onto these devices. And there's really no control of what's going on behind the scenes with these apps. And Android having its horrible app permission system already, imagine the nightmare when you don't even control the store and what's going on there. So that's why Microsoft had to do it, but it still doesn't look good, in my opinion, for Microsoft or Android on that part.
It definitely doesn't. It makes sense why they would do it, right? But it also, it really, what it's doing, in my opinion, is showing that Microsoft is making a decision that they have to do because Android is a problem. That is a weird thing to be in, because, like, of course, everybody who is part of this, the Apple versus Android debate, you would typically see Linux users using Android because Android is based on Linux to a degree. It is also significantly different, but at the same time, it is based on Linux. So a lot of the times we would be using Android. And I had a conversation with one of my brothers who was very annoyed by me when I said I was using an iPhone. And he said, didn't you say you would never use an Apple device? And I said,
that's before I met Ryan.
Well, I actually said, I don't remember saying that. And he goes, well, I remember you saying that many times. So I don't remember it. Maybe it was because I kind of blacked out the issue, but who knows? But then also Ryan did tell me about the security stuff, which I then looked up, and there's a lot of differences between the way that Android does things and the way that Apple does things. For example, the Face ID stuff. The idea that Google has the metrics of my face in their cloud system versus Apple's locally on the phone. I mean, it's a clear benefit. Like, there's a clear value there.
There's clear differences.
It's so weird, because as a Linux user, I want Android to be the choice, and then Google does things that makes me just feel very,
because I know people were going to say it, but Android allows you to run alternative OSs, and those OSs are more private and secure than Apple. And I agree. Got Fairphone right here as an example. So you have options in Android that aren't available in Apple, and Apple's control is one of the reasons why they have the ability to do that. But I'll also say this, Apple there's been a lot of news articles over the years about Apple's cases they've fought in China, where China has basically threatened to ban Apple and all this stuff because they will only allow them to go so far in making modifications. China obviously wants full control of users' devices, wants certain apps pre-installed. Apple has kind of held the line a little bit, whereas you can see with Google, there is no line to hold because manufacturers just invent their own stores, own apps, and everything else. And Google can't really do anything about it and hasn't held the line well with it. And that could very well be because the fact that it's open source. So you can just take Android, make your own version of it, right? And the portions that are open source, create your own Play Store. And there's really nothing Google can do to combat that. So is it Google's fault completely? Well, they definitely could have done a lot better with sandboxing and the app permissions and things like that. So yes, they own part of it, but also
in terms of this case, maybe they couldn't do that much different, because what you're saying about the open source, maybe they couldn't do it in this sense because they could just take their own and make their own versions and that sort of stuff. But at the same time, with the average user, they are purposefully putting in terrible structures, So like they could not make the app permissions so crap. And like how we talked about previous episode where they
click it once and you have full carte blanche access. Yeah.
Yes, but also like the self-reporting of the developers and stuff like that, where they literally have a system where the app developers have to choose certain features to get access to it. Why do they then have the ability to just pretend they didn't request it? Like what? And then also there's no checking to see if they do that. Like that part is just baffling to me. So, I mean, yes, Google could, like in this particular instance, this is more of like, well, they did go that route, so these companies can kind of bypass certain stuff. But also Google could, just not make terrible systems in the first place to make people not want to use it.
Now, I will say that if you are an advanced Android user and you hate Apple, which I know there's a lot of you in the audience that no matter what will never touch an Apple, you could do things on Android like utilizing DuckDuckGo's app protection, paying for their service there. It's free, but they also have an additional service on top, offers additional protections and things like that on your device. There are things you can do to make Android a lot more secure, or as secure, privacy focused as an iPhone. It's just not there by default. So in any case,
it's just
humorous
annoying
situation.
That it's not there by default. Yeah.
Microsoft, sorry you had to ban your employees from using Android devices there, and now your employees are all walking around with iPhones, but they're probably pretty excited to have iPhones.
I wonder if Microsoft is providing the iPhones,
Yeah. Everybody gets an iPhone 14.
Oh, you know what I actually kind of find a little interesting is that China has its own Linux distros, and it's kind of surprising that they haven't mandated their own Linux distro for their cell phones, to keep that in a walled garden. I knew there was talk of this a while ago, but
oh yeah. I wouldn't be surprised to find out they did. Like
I know.
Huawei and Xiaomi probably have so much. They're like Samsung. Like
Huawei, we've talked about, has their own cell phone OS.
Right.
Yeah.
Harmony OS.
Yeah.
So they're definitely on that road. If they've not fully converted, they're on the road to. And they're like Samsung to me. Like Samsung takes, Google Android and then layers on all their own version of the applications on top for everything. And then also has the literal worst privacy policy I have ever read. And yes, I read privacy policies for a lot of different devices. Samsung's, if you are going to read one privacy policy in your life, please read Samsung's to see like how unbelievably out of control it is. It is the worst I've ever seen for privacy. So
they basically say we're taking everything and we're selling it all.
Yeah.
Like that's the gist of it.
Synopsis. Of it. Deal with it.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of like I was listening to somebody do like the insurance call, and they had like an issue with their insurance recently, and like car insurance and that sort of thing. And I was listening, and they said at one point they said in like the whole automated message that if you would like to have us not sell your data, you could go to this page. And like you're out up front telling them that you're taking their data and selling it. Like this it's gotten so bad that they're promoting it as like they're doing something good for you to give you the option to not sell it.
Yeah. And, a lot of companies do this thing too, where they give you controls over your privacy. Like Google will tell you, like, we give you tons of controls of ads and everything you see. The problem is that there's no central control. And there are still times that I will find where Google will pop up, and I'm glad they do this, and be like, hey, have you done a privacy checkup lately? And I'll go in there and look and find some new section I didn't know about before related to something else where I need to uncheck more stuff. Like there's so much crap, whether it's their browser that's on your Android device that's getting data and it has its own privacy section, the phone itself, specific store permission systems, like Gmail itself, specific permission system. Like there's so much you have to sit there and uncheck that it's like they know that most people just don't have time or are going to spend time to go turn all that crap off,
or even like be able to differentiate all the different they go to the one permission setting like, oh, this is probably enough, and not know that there's tons of them.
One YouTube setting specifically turned off all recommendations so that the YouTube came up blank for me and just had a search bar. You know how it usually has some video suggestions?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is this? But I turned it off because I thought it was like a privacy thing, and it was because it was like suggestions or something. And I'm like, I don't want your suggestions. And it's just turned everything off.
No
you just
more
get a
YouTube.
search bar. Yeah, that's it.
That's funny.
Yeah, good old Google. We love you. We love the employees there.
Yeah, we're
Stop
big
being
fans
evil.
of a lot of the stuff they do, just not all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, we just talked about some of the stuff they did in the kernel that we like. But man, hearing this news just makes me want to go home, honestly, and cry about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of which,
Speaking of going home, so a few episodes back, we talked about Microsoft Paint actually getting much better over the years. And this game describes
much
itself
better.
as Microsoft Paint Noir. So perhaps the stigma of the past is fading away because the art of this game is actually quite lovely. The
Yep.
game is called Man, I Just Want to Go Home, and it describes itself on Steam like this. Man, I Just Want to Go Home is an MS Paint
foreshadowing.
noir visual novel with 13 endings, a unique visual style, and a killer 80s inspired soundtrack. The story revolves around a delivery person stranded in an unfamiliar part of the city under the devastating rain. All he wants is to get home. Help him.
Okay, first of all, if you're a delivery driver, you should be familiar with every part of the city you deliver in.
There you go.
That's how I feel like.
Good point, Michael.
This is an unfamiliar part. This isn't what
But it
part
should
he
be.
goes
It's like
to.
you're literally, you're a delivery driver. You should be.
Well, he knows
part
the
of,
part. Because you have sections when you're a delivery driver. Like you have this. You have the east corridor.
And how did he get to an unfamiliar part if he's
Well,
always
maybe
in one
his
section?
buddy called out a sick who works the west corridor, and now he had to work west, and he was unfamiliar with it.
Okay,
Michael.
now
or
I'm
it was
curious
pouring
actually
rain
how we.
and the car got stranded, and flooded in rain.
Yeah.
I mean, devastating rain also is not that scary of a reason to be. But this also is a really cool looking game. Like when I heard MS Paint Noir, I thought, okay, this is going to be bad, and it is very stylized. So if you don't like the idea of something being made in MS Paint, it's not going to be your style. But it is very cool in the style because it does legitimately look like a noir story or movie made in MS Paint.
It sure does, Michael. And the game, like you were saying, just has such a great visual style and atmosphere while just using a few colors, such as white and black and yellow and red flashing back and forth, representing thunder clanging in the storm. And the pitter-patter of rain is heard throughout and represented by scratchy hand-drawn white lines. And also the sound effects are perfectly timed and the music is really used to great effect. And the story is really fun, is well told, and has great humor. And
when we say Microsoft Paint
amazing.
Noir, I want to be very clear that it's someone who's, when you think about Microsoft Paint, you probably think about my art projects, which is stick figure. This would be somebody who's very good at using Microsoft Paint, like really talented.
I have seen people get like super crazy talented, and they do like a time lapse video of their art in MS Paint, and it's like mind blowing that they would use MS Paint for anything at all, but they're doing it. And this is that kind of thing where they're really they're putting in a lot of effort. I don't know if they used MS Paint, but it does look like they did.
It does look like it, yeah.
Yeah. So
it does look like it.
If they did, massive props. If you didn't and still was able to make it look like it, then that's even probably cooler because I'm curious what you would use to do that.
Yeah. And like Ryan, it has really good use of positive and negative space. There's lots of contrast, lots of bright colors on the black background.
Thanks, Jill.
And with 36 positive reviews and just a few bucks to buy, this might be a fun one to just go pick up. And
it's already up to 47 positive reviews since we were.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 36 as of yesterday.
2 days ago.
Yeah. So you can get Man, I Just Want to Go Home for only $2.99 on Steam, and it supports our Linux Penguins out of the box. But there is something really cool about this game. Man, I Just Want to Go Home is made with the awesome open source RunPy visual novel engine, which uses Python.
Wow, that's dope.
So it could have been completely made on Linux. It might not be MS Paint after all. It could be the GIMP or Krita or Photopea. Who knows?
All the innovation now is back to coming from the smaller studios. And you look at the big games and the big game companies, everyone just hates them now because they're pumping out just garbage. But these indie
And charging
studios,
hundreds of dollars for that garbage.
I love the indies.
indie studios are just making some of the coolest things here. And this is actually one I'll probably pick up because it just looks like a lot of fun and not a huge time commitment, which is
it is, and it's a short game, and it's very much a visual novel, but choose your own adventure kind of style.
Yep. Awesome. All right, Jill, what's in our software spotlight this week?
Well, this week's spotlight is for the Android users out there. And unfortunately, not for the Chinese Android.
You're gonna have to.
I mean, actually, if you are in China, you could totally use it, just unless you work for Microsoft.
Yeah, unless you work for that's the hitch. But as long as you have F-Droid, you're okay. So this week's spotlight is for the Android users out there, and it's an awesome podcast app called AntennaPod. AntennaPod is an open source podcast app with lots of great features, like, for instance, you don't need to sign up to create an account. That's awesome. There is no stealing of your personal data, and it's packed with features like episode cleanup and auto delete once you're done listening. Also, there is Llama and Tasker integration if you want to do some neat automations. And it also has feed import and export with OPML, which is one of one of the reasons I love using AntennaPod. And you can search for podcasts and synchronize with the Gpotter service. That goes way back, doesn't it?
Yeah, especially because I think Gpotter is not maintained anymore.
Yeah, it's not maintained, but you can still link to the website and get your feeds from there. Yeah. So AntennaPod is available on, like I was saying earlier, on F-Droid and the Google Play Store. And you can download all of Text Digital's awesome catalog.
There we go.
A reason in itself to use it.
Yep. The marketer Michael was like, "Where is it? Where is it? Where is it?"
I was like, "It better be here." I was like, "If you don't say it, I'm going to say it, Jill."
Right.
Yeah. And AntennaPod actually has been my go-to podcasting app for Android for over 12 years. It was the very first one I used on Android.
AntennaPod, you should clip that, put that on your website, and that's yourself.
Exactly.
Right there. Jill used this for 12 years. I mean, that's the biggest.
And then also underneath it, it'll say like a tagline of Jill is, "Of course she does."
Oh, yeah.
There you go. And we're helping AntennaPod out right there.
We should have a shirt or a hat or something like that for "Of course Jill does" or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, that would be a good one. You need to design that by next week, or you have to use rat poison.
Oh.
Not taking another deal. Nope.
Why?
Poor Michael.
Because
I have a lot of stuff going on with moves and whatnot.
Yeah, he's busy.
Unfortunately, I cannot take this particular challenge because I don't want to. Now, let's go.
So, real quick, there's a couple of items that popped up later in the week that we're going to cover next week, but I want to give people a little bit of what do they call that?
Teaser.
A teaser. I want to give them a little bit of a teaser. So, Firefox has been in the news, not for good reasons necessarily, but
somewhat in good reasons, because they've done some cool stuff with some translation things and built into the browser, and then also built into the browser.
You're giving it away. You're not teasing. You're giving too much away. You're like one of those stupid movie trailers where they give all the good action scenes are right.
That's not what I was doing. I was saying what the good stuff was, but not what the bad stuff was.
Okay. All right. We got some bad stuff. Maybe we're going to talk about it for privacy and Firefox coming your way next week. And also somebody else who's in the news for some privacy stuff, maybe good, maybe bad. It's Fedora. We're going to talk about it all next week. So you better be ready. You better have AntennaPod amped up, ready to go. All the shows downloaded, ready to listen to the latest Destination Linux.
Be locked and loaded and whatever else stuff.
A good one, Michael. That was great. It was really
I'm so good at this.
So good at this. All right. Well, a big thank you to each and every one of you for supporting us by watching. I don't know why you do, but by watching, listening to Destination Linux, however you do it. We love your faces, and come join us on our Discord at tuxdigital.com/Discord. And if you want to watch the show live, you can become a patron of Destination Linux and be able to join us every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central Time and be able to participate in the show. And by the way, patrons deserve a huge thank you, because if you hadn't noticed, Every company out there struggling right now financially and all of this stuff, and advertisers are at an all-time low. And so everybody is hurting in the podcast world and outside the podcast world. And patrons are what keep this show going. And so we are very thankful to the patrons who have continued to donate month over month, year over year, whatever they're donating. We appreciate it. So whether you're taking advantage of those perks, or you're just doing it because you love the show, know that you're the ones who keep the show going each and every week, because it's not cheap to run the show. It's just not. And so we appreciate it very much.
There's a lot to do in terms of like just the facilitation of doing it. Plus also there's a lot of time involved in the prepping of it, the doing it, the recording, the editing, all that sort of stuff. So we thank you so much for being patrons. And if you would like to help us and become a patron yourself, you can go to tuxdigital.com/membership to sign up, and you get a ton of perks. Ryan mentioned that you could go to our Discord server, but there's also a patron-only section of our Discord server where you can talk to us. And in addition to that, there's a live stream that we do for the patrons every week in the Discord server. You can watch the show live and join us in the patron-only post show that happens after the show every week. So tuxdigital.com/membership to get all of that and to help this show exist, really. Because if you haven't noticed the past couple of episodes, I think it's been a couple, there's not any ads. And you might be thinking, oh, that's so great. Well,
not for us.
Yeah. Go to tuxdigital.com/store if you'd like to pick up some swag and help us in that way. There's t-shirts, hoodies, hats, mugs, and so much more, including the new I'm Unhackable stuff. That's at tuxdigital.com/store.
And make sure to check out all the amazing shows here on Tux Digital. That's right. We have an entire network of shows to fill your whole week with gooky
and
goodness.
geeky. We're gooky like Adam's family.
I like it. Gooky geekness.
Gooky geekness. So check out Linux Out Loud with Matt, Nate, and Wendy having a blast and sharing their awesome passion for Linux and open source. And everyone head to tuxdigital.com and subscribe to all our great shows. And don't forget to leave a rating on your favorite app. If it has 5 stars, leave 5 stars. If it has 5 thumbs up, leave 5 thumbs up.
So if it has 10, do 10.
Yeah, if it has 10, leave 10, please. So others can discover the power of open source and keep those penguins marching and the full Monty of Linux and open source awesome sauce.
Yeah. Everybody have a great week. And remember that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Thanks, everyone.
See you next week.
You're so gooky.
Love you all.
Our gooky goodness.
Geekness.
Gooky geekness. I like it.
I wonder if we should just add that in. So every time we just gooky geekness.
I like it.
Gooky geekness.
Gooky geekness. And people are like, what?
That would be a shirt too. I listen to Destination Linux.
Here, I'll put it in
gooky
right
geekness.
now.
Yes.
Exactly. Or we could just have like gooky geekness. As
It'd be a great Halloween shirt. Gooky geekness.
Yeah.
Ooh, a Halloween shirt. Right?
What?
Really scary one. It has Michael's face on it and it has gooky geekness over it.
Or ghoulky geekness. Ghoulky.
Oh, ghoulky. Yeah, like a ghoul.
That's so cool.
Or geeky ghoulness.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You're losing it. You're losing it, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, there's only so many great ideas you can come up with like back to back at one time, you know? That's why it's called brainstorming. Because at some point, it feels like a thunderstorm in your brain.
There's only so many good ideas, and yet you've yet to come up with one.
I've come up with tons. What are you talking about? Like the unhackable thing that you came up with? I totally.
Fair. Steal my ideas. I like it.
Yeah, I mean,
I did tell you I like the book Steal Like an Artist, so you just took it to heart.
Exactly. You ever seen that meme about it's like, I made this, you made this?
Yeah.
I made this.
Yes.
There you go.
It's like you just decide all of a sudden you've made it. I like it. So that's the way I do my designs. I'm an artist.
It's time to talk to our patrons. I see Wendy's in here, and I was talking crap earlier. Oh, crap.
She heard everything,
Gotta
Ryan.
face Wendy now. Oh, my goodness. All right.
We're going to see if she has any
You better stop the recording before she gets on, Michael, because there might be a lot of, Just saying.
Oh, my goodness.
Won't be family friendly,
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us and watching the show. And remember,
we love you all.